This video covers a real homicide case. It contains descriptions that some viewers may find distressing. Viewer discretion is strongly advised.
Where does this depravity come from? How can you, as someone is begging for their life, someone who has done nothing wrong, someone is asking you, please, you don't have to do this. Someone is saying, please, can we just pray? How can someone be so callous, so depraved, to be able to go face to face with this innocent person and just take their life?
Welcome back. And to those joining for the first time, thank you for being here. To our returning viewers, your support means everything. Today's case is one that devastated an entire college community and left lasting questions about safety, trust, and justice. In 2008, the murder of University of North Carolina student was described by state and national outlets as one of the most shocking and heartbreaking crimes in North Carolina's history. The brutality of it, and the fact that it happened in a quiet, educated town often seen as one of the safest in America, left Chapel Hill shaken to its core. Just before dawn, the woods outside Chapel Hill were still. A young woman stood between two men, her breath visible in the cold air. Her voice trembled as she whispered, "Will you pray with me?" There was a pause, then the deafening crack of a gunshot. One, then another, and another. 4 gunshots at close range that echoed through the trees, rolling over Hillcrest Circle until they faded into silence. Seconds later, around 5 a.m., a nearby resident jolted awake to that same sound.
Orange County 911, this is Rob.
Hi, I think I just heard gunshots outside.
Okay, how many shots did you hear?
4.
You heard 4?
I think so, yeah.
Okay, did you see anyone by chance?
No, I mean, I was laying awake in bed.
Yes, ma'am. Okay. All right, well, you want to speak to an officer about this?
Well, I don't know.
A woman's scream, followed by rapid gunfire. Terrified, she dialed 911. Responding officers followed the sound to the edge of the neighborhood. Under the beam of flashlights lay a young woman, cold and lifeless on the pavement, multiple gunshot wounds to her chest and head. By mid-morning, word of the early morning shooting had begun to ripple across campus. Students traded rumors. A scream in the woods, police cars near Hillcrest Circle, something terrible happening close to home. Across town, in a quiet rental on Friendly Lane, a group of roommates were growing uneasy. One of them hadn't come home. Her phone went straight to voicemail. Her bed was untouched, her car missing. What started as mild concern was turning into panic. They finally called police to report her missing, unaware that just a mile away, investigators were already combing over a crime scene. The 2 calls would soon connect, linking a name and a face to the horror that had unfolded before sunrise. Eve Carson wasn't just another student. She was the student every parent hoped their child would become. A 22-year-old from Athens, Georgia. She was brilliant, driven, and genuinely kind. She'd earned the prestigious Morehead-Cain scholarship, studied political science and biology, and served as UNC's student body president. Friends described her as the heartbeat of the campus, confident yet humble, a leader who believed in lifting others. She had already accepted a position at McKinsey & Company and dreamed of shaping education policy after graduation. Her parents, Bob and Teresa Carson, and her younger brother Andrew, watched proudly as she built a life defined by purpose. But in one night, everything they imagined for her, every milestone, every tomorrow, vanished in the woods outside Chapel Hill. Before we continue, take a second to hit subscribe, drop a like, and let me know where you're watching from. Your support helps keep these stories alive and this community growing. Her name was Eve Marie Carson, born on November 19, 1985, in Athens, Georgia, she grew up in a home filled with books, laughter, and purpose. Her parents, Bob and Teresa, both educators, raised her and her younger brother Andrew to believe that intelligence only mattered when it served others. From childhood, Eve had been the kind of student teachers remembered years later, organized, optimistic, and endlessly curious. At Clark Central High School, she did everything at once: straight A grades, volunteer work, student government, cross-country, debate. Her classmates voted her student body president and valedictorian. When she left Athens for college, her teacher said they'd never met anyone quite like her, a sentiment Chapel Hill would soon echo. In 2004, Eve entered the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill as a Morehead-Cain Scholar, the university's most prestigious merit award, giving to only a handful of students worldwide. Friends said she treated the title not as a trophy, but as a responsibility. She majored in political science and biology, often describing herself as a science-minded idealist. She believed policy and medicine could work together to make communities healthier and fairer. According to those who knew her best, Eve lived with extraordinary balance. Between labs and late-night study sessions, she found time to volunteer with Girls on the Run, mentor elementary students, and coordinate campus service projects. She worked summers abroad in Ecuador, Egypt, and Ghana, teaching basic computer literacy and helping rural clinics manage data. Each trip changed her perspective. Each homecoming made her more determined to lead through compassion. By her senior year, she'd been elected student body president, a position so demanding that few students attempted it while double majoring. Yet she managed it with warmth. Classmates recalled how she'd stop in the quad to ask about someone's exam, or stay late after meetings so everyone's voice was heard. She made you feel like the most important person in the room, one advisor told reporters later. Before graduation, Eve accepted an offer from McKinsey & Company, planning to gain experience before applying to a PhD program in public policy. Her future seemed mapped out in luminous detail until a single night in March 2008 erased it all. And as investigators would soon learn, the brightness of her life would make the darkness that followed impossible to forget. At around 5 a.m. on March 5, 2008, a resident of Hillcrest Circle was startled awake by a sound that didn't belong in a college town. She later told dispatchers she heard a single gunshot, then a woman's terrified scream, followed by 3 more shots in rapid succession. It wasn't fireworks, she said. It was something far worse. Officers were dispatched immediately, headlights slicing through the mist as they entered the wooded neighborhood just north of campus. Under the harsh glare of floodlights, detectives marked what would become the first pieces of evidence. On the pavement near the intersection of Hillcrest Road and Hillcrest Circle lay a young woman, her body still and pale in the pre-dawn cold. According to investigators, she had been shot multiple times with 2 different firearms, a handgun and a shotgun. Shell casings were scattered nearby, their metallic glint catching the flashlight beams. There was no purse, no phone, and no car. Whoever had done this had vanished without a trace. Chapel Hill police cordoned off the area, securing what they now recognized as a homicide scene. Forensic technicians began their work methodically, measuring blood patterns, photographing every shell casing, and mapping footprints pressed into the damp soil. Investigators noted drag marks leading from the curb toward the brush, suggesting the attack began near the road. Nothing in the scene fit the pattern of a targeted killing. To detectives, it looked abrupt, fast, violent, and personal. As dawn broke over campus, police radio chatter spread. Students woke to the sound of sirens echoing through the trees. By mid-morning, word of gunfire had made its way to the University of North Carolina community. Some thought it might have been an accident. Others whispered about a robbery. campus security issued an alert advising students to stay indoors until further notice. Across town, on Friendly Lane, a quiet rental home was filled with worry. Eve's roommates were calling her phone again and again. No answer. Her bed was still made, her laptop open on the desk, and her blue 2005 Toyota Highlander missing from the driveway. They finally called police to report her missing around 9 a.m. Officers took the report, unaware that another division had already found a young woman's body less than a mile away. Within hours, the two calls merged. Detectives compared notes and quickly realized that the missing student and the unidentified victim shared key details: height, hair color, clothing. By noon, investigators obtained Eve's dental records. Late that afternoon, the match was confirmed. The victim on Hillcrest Circle was 22-year-old Eve Marie Carson. When the news broke, the reaction was immediate and visceral. Students gathered on campus lawns, many in tears, some clutching candles in disbelief. Chapel Hill, a place known for safety, scholarship, and optimism, was suddenly the epicenter of a senseless killing. Faculty canceled classes, church bells tolled, and strangers hugged in the street. Reporters flooded the small police headquarters. Every question led to another mystery. Who would murder a student body president? Why take her car and personal belongings? And how had the killers disappeared so completely into the night? According to investigators, the break that would blow the case wide open wasn't waiting in the woods or at the scene at all. It was hidden somewhere else, captured quietly, frame by frame, by the unblinking eye of a well-hidden camera. The clue that would finally lead investigators out of the darkness came from a quiet hum inside a bank machine. According to investigators, the first clear timestamp of that night appeared on digital logs from an ATM at the University Mall in Chapel Hill. 3:55 a.m. Eve's debit card had been inserted multiple times within minutes. Less than half an hour earlier, at 3:37 a.m., her laptop had shown its final activity. That was the moment her normal world stopped recording movement, and the suspect's actions began leaving their digital fingerprints. The security footage from that ATM was grainy but revealing. A drive-up camera captured a man wearing a dark hoodie and baseball cap leaning toward the screen. The machine's glow cut across his face for just a second, enough to show a thin jawline, deep-set eyes, and a flash of youth. In one frame, another faint shape could be seen in the rear passenger seat, possibly someone sitting low, motionless. Analysts enhanced the frames, adjusting light balance and contrast. What emerged, prosecutors later said, became the pivot point of the entire case. The next clue came through her bank account. Between 3:55 a.m. and 5 a.m., several withdrawal attempts were recorded. Only one succeeded. Then, silence. Hours later, after the murder, someone tried again. 2 more transactions in Durham, then one at a convenience store the following day. In total, roughly $1,400 had been drained from Eve's account before the card was deactivated. Each transaction left a new breadcrumb for detectives. Investigators pulled timestamps, compared camera angles, and traced the car seen in footage. A blue 2005 Toyota Highlander, registered to Eve. 2 days after the murder. That same vehicle was found parked off North Street near Hillsborough, roughly a mile from the crime scene. Chapel Hill police secured it immediately. Forensic technicians photographed everything: the steering wheel, gear shift, door handles, and discarded items in the back seat. DNA swabs were taken from the interior surfaces, and fingerprints were lifted from the driver's door. Later, crime lab analysts confirmed at least one partial print matched an offender already in the state database. The finding narrowed the suspect pool to a handful of known repeat offenders from nearby Durham. Meanwhile, The autopsy results confirmed what police already feared. The killing had been execution style. Court records show that Eve suffered multiple gunshot wounds, including one fatal 12-gauge shotgun blast to the head. Smaller caliber rounds struck her chest and arm. The defensive injuries on her right arm suggested she tried to shield herself. Ballistic testing confirmed 2 separate firearms had been used, meaning at least 2 attackers were present. The evidence trail was becoming impossible to ignore. 2 weapons, 2 sets of DNA, 2 distinct silhouettes caught by a camera. Detectives began to suspect that whoever had murdered Eve Carson wasn't a single predator acting alone, but a pair moving together through the darkness. But when they circulated the enhanced ATM images across law enforcement networks, tips began flooding in, and 2 names kept reappearing. 2 faces already familiar to law enforcement. Within 24 hours of circulating the ATM stills, investigators had their suspects: Demario James Atwater, age 21, and Lawrence Alvin Levet Jr., just 17. According to investigators, both men were from nearby Durham and already well known to police. Atwater had a record stretching back years: assault, robbery, weapons charges, probation violations. Court records show that he was on supervised release at the time of Eve's murder, and had even missed a scheduled court appearance just days earlier because of a clerical mistake that postponed his hearing. Levet's name appeared in juvenile files for larceny and breaking and entering. He too was on probation. The 2 had met through mutual friends in Durham's underworld and had begun running together. Small robberies, quick money, never much planning. Detectives traced the link between them through neighborhood interviews and phone records. Both suspects' numbers pinged cell towers in Chapel Hill during the early morning hours of March 5th, exactly matching the timeline of Eve's disappearance. When police compared those pings with the ATM withdrawal data, the overlap was unmistakable. On March 12, 2008, a joint task force moved in. Before dawn, Durham SWAT surrounded a small duplex on Rosedale Avenue. According to arrest reports, officers watched Atwater step outside carrying a trash bag. He was tackled and taken into custody without incident. Inside the house, investigators found clothing similar to that seen in the ATM footage and several spent shell casings consistent with the ammunition recovered from Hillcrest Circle. Levet proved harder to locate. Tips placed him at several friends' apartments across Durham. After 2 days of surveillance, officers spotted him leaving a residence near Alston Avenue, the same area where one of Eve's stolen card transactions had occurred. He tried to run, but was caught a few blocks away. In his pocket were small amounts of cash and a prepaid phone later confirmed to have connected with Atwater's the night of the killing. Prosecutors later alleged that the pair had driven through Chapel Hill searching for an easy target. They claimed that when they saw Eve's lights on in her room and her car parked alone, they broke in, forced her at gunpoint into the vehicle, and made her withdraw cash before shooting her when she begged for mercy. For Chapel Hill, the news was unbearable. 2 men, who should have been under state supervision, one a violent felon, the other a probationary juvenile, had slipped through a system described by officials as a collapse in process. What began as a random act of greed was now exposing deeper failures of oversight. As the suspects sat behind bars awaiting indictment, the focus of the entire state shifted toward the next phase: the long, public fight for justice that would unfold beneath the harsh lights of the courtroom. The fight for justice in Eve Carson's case would no longer take place in the woods or on dark streets. It moved instead into a courtroom filled with reporters, law students, and grieving parents. Both suspects were indicted on a barrage of charges: first-degree murder, first-degree kidnapping, armed robbery, and possession of a firearm by a felon. Prosecutors said the crime combined greed, opportunity, and a level of cruelty that stunned even veteran detectives. The evidence trail, ATM footage, DNA from the SUV and ballistic matches from 2 different guns was airtight. Still, the courtroom had to bear witness to every detail. Demario James Atwater faced the harshest judgment first. In April 2010, according to court records, he entered a plea deal in federal court, admitting to carjacking and kidnapping resulting in death. That plea spared him the death penalty. On September 23rd of that year, he stood before the judge and through tears apologized to the Carson family. "I'm sorry for everything that happened," he said quietly, his voice breaking. But as observers noted, no apology could bridge the gulf between his words and what he had done. The court sentenced him to life in federal prison without the possibility of parole, plus an additional 10 years, a sentence that would run alongside his state life term. Prosecutors described him as a man driven by extreme greed and violence, who robbed a more promising future than his to fix his own failures. Then came Lawrence Alvin Lovett Jr., only 17 at the time of the murder, but tried as an adult. His trial opened in December 2011 in Orange County. Jurors watched hours of evidence, surveillance footage from multiple ATMs, phone records linking Lovett's movements to the crime scene, and forensic testimony confirming his presence in Eve's Toyota Highlander. When the verdict came on December 20th, the courtroom fell silent. Lovett was found guilty on all counts and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole, plus additional time for robbery and kidnapping.
Margaret, the 23-year-old, offered an apology to Eve Carson's parents who were in the front row in the courtroom today. But Demario Atwater will spend life in prison, in federal prison, I should say. A judge handed down the sentence early this morning on the second floor of the federal courthouse here in downtown Winston-Salem. Atwater admitted his part in the 2008 murder of Eve Carson back in May. Today, he found out just how long he will spend in prison for his part in the kidnapping death of UNC student body president. Atwater pled guilty to 5 counts, including carjacking, resulting in death, and kidnapping. A federal judge sentenced him to serve life. But before the judge handed down the sentence, Atwater stood before the court and spoke for the very first time. He said, quote, "I was prepared to talk about my life's problems, but I realized it would be a waste of time. It's not about me today. It's about accepting responsibility." He then turned towards Eve Carson's parents who were in the court and said, "I'm sorry for everything that happened." His attorney says Atwater is very remorseful, and his words today were unexpected.
To tell them he's sorry. He knew that there's no way that being sorry can ever be enough or take it back. That he would have traded his life if he could, but he couldn't. But that apology was his. It wasn't rehearsed. It wasn't discussed. It was what he stood up in court and gave.
Carson's parents were given the opportunity to speak to the court today. They declined, and they did not talk to reporters as they left the federal courthouse here in downtown Winston-Salem. But again, Demario Atwater sentenced to life in federal prison for his part in the 2008 murder of Eve Carson. Reporting live, Margaret, back to you.
2 years later, new legal rulings required resentencing for juvenile offenders. Lovett's attorneys argued that life without parole for a 17-year-old was unconstitutional. But in 2013, after hearing testimony from both sides, the judge reimposed the same punishment. In 2014, the North Carolina Court of Appeals upheld the sentence, calling the murder cold, callous, and premeditated. There was one more twist. Months before Eve's death, Duke graduate student Abhijit Mahato had been killed in a separate robbery. Lovett was charged in that case as well. But on July 31st, 2014, a Durham jury found him not guilty, citing insufficient evidence. Throughout every hearing, Eve's parents sat only feet away from the men who had taken their daughter's life. In their victim impact statement, Bob and Teresa Carson described Eve as the embodiment of hope. The judge's final words echoed across the courtroom. This was not a moment of impulse. It was a deliberate act of brutality. If cases like this matter to you, please subscribe and share this video. Behind the verdicts and the headlines, another story was emerging. one that revealed just how preventable this tragedy might have been. According to state records, Demario Atwater should never have been free the night Eve Carson was killed. He was already on probation for prior felony convictions, his supervision status active under the North Carolina Department of Correction. But investigators later discovered that his probation case had fallen through the cracks. Court hearing meant to revoke his release had been delayed after a clerical error misfiled his paperwork. No one followed up. That single oversight, one administrative slip, allowed a violent offender to remain on the streets. Officials called it a missed prevention window. The phrase echoed through state meetings and legislative sessions for months. Journalists exposed further gaps in probation tracking across North Carolina. Overworked officers managing hundreds of offenders at once, outdated software, and minimal cross-county coordination. It was a system built to monitor, not to prevent. In the aftermath of Eve's murder, the case forced the state to confront its failures. Lawmakers ordered an internal audit of the probation system, uncovering hundreds of similar lapses, offenders listed as supervised, who had long vanished from oversight. Policy reviews soon followed, introducing stricter reporting deadlines and better digital tracking. But for the Carson family, none of it would ever be enough. In interviews, community members repeated the same haunting thought. If one document had been filed correctly, if one hearing had been held on time, Eve might still be alive. This wasn't just a lapse, it was a collapse in process, and it cost a promising young life that represented everything the system was meant to protect. This collapse in process had allowed Eve's killers to roam free and left more than a paper trail. It left a wound that spread through an entire state. In the days after the sentencing, Chapel Hill fell silent. Thousands of students, faculty, and townspeople filled Polk Place, the center of the University of North Carolina campus, their faces lit only by candlelight. The gathering stretched across the quad in complete stillness. Reporters said the crowd was so large that it spilled down the steps of Wilson Library. The vigil ended with a moment of silence, broken only by muffled sobs. In the following weeks, the grief grew into something larger. Across the country, Eve's photograph, smiling, bright-eyed, wearing her Carolina blue, appeared on national broadcasts. Major news networks replayed the story endlessly, framing it as both a tragedy and a wake-up call about probation failures and youth violence. Commentators debated how two known offenders could have remained unsupervised, and why someone like Eve, a symbol of promise, had been the one caught in their path. On campus, professors postponed exams. Students tied blue ribbons around trees, placed handwritten notes outside the student government office, and painted the words, "Live like Eve," across the bricks of the pit. Her name became shorthand for compassion and integrity, a reminder of what Chapel Hill stood for, even in its darkest hour. Her parents, Bob and Teresa Carson, faced the cameras only once after the trials. Their message was calm, but devastating. They asked people not to respond with bitterness, but to honor their daughter through service. Eve believed leadership meant empathy, Bob said. If you want to remember her, live the way she did, curious, kind, and brave. Their words turned grief into resolve, inspiring a wave of volunteer projects and memorial scholarships across North Carolina. The community changed too. Town and campus police began working in joint patrols, increasing late-night safety measures. The university introduced new ride programs and counseling services for students shaken by the crime. Chapel Hill, a place once defined by its calm, had been forced to evolve through heartbreak. The pain of losing Eve Carson would never fade, but what began as mourning was quietly turning into movement. And that movement would soon ensure that her name meant more than tragedy. It meant legacy. In the months following her death, UNC students and alumni came together to create something lasting. The Eve Carson Scholarship. Established in 2008, it was built on her own ideas about student leadership and service, transformed into a living memorial by those who knew her best. The program is fully student-run, funded through donations and university support, and every decision, from applicant selection to event planning, is handled by students who carry on the values Eve championed: curiosity, compassion, and courage. According to university records, the scholarship awards are among the most prestigious honors an undergraduate can receive at UNC. Each year, 2 juniors are chosen based on leadership, character, and commitment to service. Recipients receive a $5,000 summer grant to pursue global or community projects, followed by $15,000 toward senior year tuition. The slogan carved into its mission statement reads, "Students celebrating students." It's a direct reflection of Eve's belief that achievement means nothing without empathy. Her legacy didn't end there. Eve was posthumously awarded the Chancellor's Award for Most Outstanding Woman and later recognized as a Distinguished Young Alumnus, an honor rarely given to someone so young. Professors still reference her speeches in leadership courses. Campus leaders still cite her initiatives as models of servant leadership. Her story continues to inspire not only scholarships, but also mentorship programs and public service fellowships across the country. For those who knew her, these tributes are more than gestures. They're continuations of her unfinished work. Eve Carson transformed how a university saw itself, how students defined leadership, and how a community measured strength in the face of loss. She turned leadership into kindness. Even in death, she built something that outlives every headline, every trial, every moment of horror that took her away. If this story moved you, share it to honor Eve Carson's memory and push for change. Every view keeps her light alive.
There's blood on the wall here. There's blood on the wall here.
It's the chilling moment that a woman reveals what really happened in this house of horrors.
When you came in, what did you see? When I first walked in, I saw blood all over the floor. I saw blood up the wall.
Based on information developed during the course of this investigation, and because of the length of time, it's been 23 days that has passed since Kelsey was last seen, our investigators believe that Kelsey's disappearance is more suspicious and that she is not intentionally avoiding efforts to find her. We are looking at all avenues and our focus is on finding Kelsey.
In November 2018, a crime unfolded in the quiet mountain town of Woodland Park, Colorado, that would shake the community to its core and send shockwaves across the entire nation. What appeared to be a simple missing persons case on Thanksgiving Day quickly spiraled into one of the most calculated, cold-blooded murders Colorado had ever seen. A case so brutal, so meticulously planned, that even veteran FBI agents and seasoned homicide detectives would later describe it as one of the most disturbing they'd ever worked. This wasn't just a murder, it was a betrayal so profound, but deception so layered, that it would expose the darkest capabilities of human cruelty and leave a community asking, how could this happen to someone so loved in a place that felt so safe? The house looked almost normal at first glance. When officers arrived for the welfare check, they found her car parked outside. Inside, there were unwashed dishes in the sink, half-eaten food on the counter. Her belongings were untouched, clothes in the closet, bags in their place. No signs of a struggle, no signs of forced entry, no signs of foul play. But her mother knew better. Something was very, very wrong. So, when family members returned to check the house themselves, they noticed things the police hadn't. The heat was cranked to maximum, sweltering, unbearable. Cinnamon buns sat on the counter, baked days ago but never eaten. The refrigerator looked like it had been recently wiped down. You could still see the streaks. Then they saw it, what looked like blood in the bathroom. They called investigators back immediately. This time, they brought luminol, and a cadaver dog. When they sprayed the chemical and killed the lights, everything changed. The house erupted in eerie blue light. Blood everywhere, splattered so high up the walls that someone had to climb to reach it. Pooled across the kitchen floor, smeared on the dishwasher, the stove, the coffee maker, even on the tin foil covering those cinnamon buns, the ones she'd baked that Thanksgiving morning. Bloody footprints trailed up the stairs, blood streaked behind the couch, blood under cabinets. The bathroom mat was missing entirely. Someone had tried to clean this scene. They'd scrubbed for hours, wiping down every surface they could reach. But you can't hide this much blood, not when it's everywhere. DNA testing would soon confirm what investigators feared. It belonged to 29-year-old Kelsey Barrett, a pilot, a flight instructor, and a mother to a 1-year-old daughter. The lead investigator would later say that in his 37 years on the force, this was his first no-body case. Standing in that house, seeing the sheer volume of blood lighting up under the luminol, he knew one thing for certain. Kelsey never left this house alive. But if she didn't leave, where was she? The questions multiplied fast. Her phone had pinged 800 miles away in Idaho, but Kelsey had never been there. Text messages were being sent from her phone days after she vanished, but the words didn't sound like her. Her boss received a message saying she was taking the week off, something Kelsey would never do without explanation. And then there was the last person to see her alive. Someone close to her. Someone she trusted. Someone whose story didn't add up. Kelsey Barrett was only 29 years old, but she'd already built a remarkable life. Friends described her as a country girl at heart. Someone who loved the outdoors, driving tractors, and living simply. She was adventurous and passionate about aviation, working as a flight instructor in Pueblo, Colorado. In an industry dominated by men, Kelsey had earned deep respect through sheer skill and dedication. But what mattered most to Kelsey was her family. Her mother, Cheryl, was her best friend. They spoke every single day. And her greatest joy was her 1-year-old daughter, Kaylee. Kelsey was a devoted, fiercely loving mother who would have done anything for that little girl. That Thanksgiving morning, November 22nd, 2018, Kelsey had been baking cinnamon buns and planning a quiet holiday dinner. She was excited, chatting with her mom about the future. She'd gone to the local Safeway with Kaylee to pick up groceries. Surveillance cameras captured her walking through the store, smiling, calm, holding her daughter's hand. It was the last time anyone saw her alive. What happened in the hours that followed would reveal a plot so twisted, so unthinkable, that it would take investigators across state lines, uncover a web of lies, and expose a killer hiding in plain sight. Before we continue with this case, I want to welcome you to the channel, and if you're returning, thank you so much for your continued support. It truly means the world. Now you're about to hear one of the most shocking cases in recent true crime history. The investigation into Kelsey Barrett's disappearance would uncover secrets no one saw coming. And the truth? It's far worse than anyone imagined. Before Kelsey Barrett became a name etched into true crime history, she was simply a young woman chasing her dreams at 30,000 feet. Born on September 15, 1989 in Moses Lake, Washington, Kelsey grew up with dirt under her fingernails and sky in her eyes. On her family's farm, she spent her childhood alongside her younger brother Clint, 2 years her junior and her constant companion, while other little girls played with dolls. Kelsey was outside driving tractors and bucking bales. Even as a child, she knew exactly what she wanted to be when she grew up. A crop duster pilot. There was something about the freedom of flight, the wide open sky above those Washington fields, that called to her. And Kelsey didn't just dream, she made it happen. After studying aviation in college, Kelsey became a flight instructor. In May 2016, she moved to Colorado for a career opportunity that would change her life. By July 2017, she'd been hired at DOS Aviation in Pueblo, now part of L3 Harris Technologies, where she would train the next generation of American military pilots. Every day, Kelsey made the 60-mile commute each way from her home in Woodland Park to the flight school, determined to do work that mattered. As one of only a few female flight instructors at DOS Aviation, Kelsey stood out. But it wasn't just because she was a woman in a male-dominated field. Her co-workers described her as quiet but sharp, intelligent, sweet, and deeply dedicated. She completed what they called a grueling training program, one that even Air Force veterans with 20 years of experience found difficult. Yet Kelsey excelled. Her students adored her. They signed dollar bills and left them on her desk as tokens of gratitude for her excellent teaching. Despite her small stature, Kelsey could intimidate even large football players when she was in the cockpit. As one colleague put it, there was no doubt who was in charge. She was a natural pilot with an exceptional ability to teach others to fly. On Kelsey's desk sat a Bible with a daily quote calendar. The last page she ever opened was November 21st, 2018. The verse read, "For it is God who works in you." Philippians 2:13. Outside of work, Kelsey loved the simple things. Her morning coffee, especially caramel macchiatos from Starbucks, going for runs, spending time with God, getting good sleep, and above all, talking to her mother Cheryl. The two spoke every single day without fail. That bond between mother and daughter was unbreakable. Kelsey Barrett was 29 years old, living her dream and making a difference in the lives of those who would go on to serve their country as military pilots. But in 2016, Kelsey's life was about to change forever. She swiped right on a dating app, and the man on the other side of that screen would become the last person to ever see her alive. In 2016, she met Patrick Frazee, a 32-year-old rancher and farrier from Florissant, Colorado. Patrick lived on his mother Sheila's 35-acre ranch where he trained cattle dogs and cared for horses and donkeys. On paper, he seemed like exactly the kind of man a country girl like Kelsey might fall for. The couple hit it off immediately. Before long, they were engaged, and in October 2017, Kelsey gave birth to their daughter, Kaylee. But there were cracks in the foundation from the very beginning. Despite being engaged and sharing a child together, Patrick and Kelsey never lived together. Their long-distance relationship continued even after Kaylee was born. The baby lived with Kelsey in her Woodland Park townhouse, and Kelsey would drive to Patrick's ranch on her days off. Patrick wanted Kelsey to move in with him, but there was a catch. She wouldn't just be moving in with Patrick. She'd be moving in with his mother, Sheila, too. Kelsey refused. She wanted to build a life with Patrick and Kaylee, just the three of them, not with his mother under the same roof. The disagreement created a standstill. Moving plans went nowhere. Then there were the financial troubles. Patrick was drowning in debt. A $72,000 loan default hung over his head. He owed Kelsey $700 a month in child support, and he hadn't paid a cent since July 2018. There was also a $400,000 inheritance dispute following his father's death earlier that year. And Patrick was listed as the beneficiary on Kelsey's life insurance policy, though it may have lapsed. Money wasn't the only red flag. When Kaylee was born in October 2017, Patrick had a violent outburst at the hospital, alarming enough that medical staff called social services. It should have been a warning sign, but Kelsey stayed. By late 2018, friends said the relationship was getting tougher. Kelsey confided in coworkers that she worried Patrick might be talking to an ex-girlfriend. She told friends she was struggling to juggle everything: her demanding job, the long commute, being a new mother, and a partner who seemed increasingly distant. Patrick had checked out, they said. He refused to come see her. His life wasn't changing to accommodate their family. All the compromises fell on Kelsey's shoulders. Still, she wasn't ready to give up on what they had. As 2018 came to a close and the holiday season arrived, Kelsey was trying to focus on what mattered, spending Thanksgiving with Kaylee, who was just over a year old. But on November 22, 2018, Kelsey Barrett would vanish without a trace, and the last person to see her alive would be the father of her child. Thanksgiving morning, November 22, 2018, started like any other holiday. Kelsey Barrett woke up in good spirits, ready to celebrate. She was baking cinnamon buns for Thanksgiving dinner, the smell of cinnamon and sugar filling her townhouse. She called her mother, Cheryl, to get the recipe details just right. Cheryl would later tell investigators that Kelsey sounded happy and fine. There was nothing unusual about their conversation, nothing that suggested anything was wrong. Kelsey was planning dinner. She wanted everything to be perfect. At 9:37 that morning, Kelsey sent a text to Patrick. "I bought some sweet potatoes in case you wanted some sweet potato casserole." She was clearly planning to spend the holiday with him, making sure he'd have his favorite dishes. At 12:27 p.m., surveillance cameras captured Kelsey at the Safeway in Woodland Park. She had little Kaylee with her, smiling and calm as she moved through the store. She was buying flowers, cider, ingredients for dip, a mother shopping for a holiday meal. The footage shows a woman with her whole life ahead of her. This was the last time anyone outside Patrick's circle would ever see Kelsey Barrett alive. But Patrick's story about that day, it didn't quite add up. Between 12:54 and 1:17 p.m., Patrick was spotted at a Walmart, and he already had Kaylee with him. He was carrying a baby carrier. If Kelsey had just been at Safeway with Kaylee at 12:27, how did Patrick already have the baby less than half an hour later? Patrick later told police that he and Kelsey had met in an alley to exchange Kaylee. He claimed that was the last time he saw her. According to Patrick, Kelsey had called him the day before Thanksgiving to break up with him. She couldn't handle the commute anymore, he said. She wanted space. Patrick claimed he'd given her personal items back during their meeting, including her handgun. That was his story, and he was sticking to it. But then came the silence. After 4:30 that afternoon, Kelsey's phone went dead. No more calls, no more texts. For a woman who spoke to her mother every single day without fail, this was unthinkable. No posts on social media, no contact with friends, nothing, complete silence. 3 days later, on November 25th, strange text messages began appearing. Kelsey's boss at DOS Aviation received a text saying she wouldn't be at work that week. Patrick got a text, a breakup message asking for space. Cheryl received messages too, but something felt off. The tone didn't sound like Kelsey. The word choices seemed wrong. Friends and family read those texts with growing unease. These messages didn't sound like the woman they knew. Where was Kelsey, and why wasn't she calling her mother? Kelsey's mother, Cheryl, knew something was terribly wrong, because Kelsey never missed a day without calling. Never. And 19 days of silence was unthinkable. 19 days of silence from a woman who called her mother every single day without fail. The last time they'd spoken was Thanksgiving morning, November 22nd, when Kelsey had called for the cinnamon bun recipe. After that, nothing. On December 2nd, 2018, Cheryl reported Kelsey missing to Woodland Park Police. The next day, Commander Chris Adams began an active investigation. Officers arrived at Kelsey's townhouse at 4881 Old Farm Circle for a welfare check. Her car sat in the driveway. Inside, unwashed dishes, half-eaten food, flowers on the table. Those cinnamon buns from Thanksgiving, now 10 days old, still sat on the counter. Kelsey's belongings appeared untouched. Her car keys were inside, but her phone and purse were missing. No luggage was packed. To officers, there were no obvious signs of foul play. When police interviewed Patrick, his story raised questions. He repeated his claim. They'd met in an alley, exchanged Kaylee, and that was the last time he'd seen her. Then Patrick went further. He suggested Kelsey was unstable, possibly depressed. He hinted at drug abuse. Maybe she was in rehab somewhere. Friends and family were shocked. None of this was true. Coworkers at DOS Aviation had never seen signs of problems. Kelsey loved being a mother. She posted photos of Kaylee constantly. Everything Patrick was saying was a lie. Cheryl and Kelsey's brother Clint decided to check the townhouse themselves. They knew her place intimately. They could spot things police might miss. The moment they stepped inside, something felt wrong. The heat was cranked to maximum, sweltering, suffocating. The refrigerator looked recently wiped down, streaks still visible. A bathroom mat was missing. Then Clint saw it, what looked like blood on the toilet. They called investigators back immediately. This time, investigators returned with luminol and a cadaver dog. They turned off the lights and sprayed the chemical throughout the townhouse. The house erupted in an eerie blue glow. Blood was everywhere. The floor, walls splattered high up, the dishwasher, the stove, the coffee maker, even on the tin foil covering those Thanksgiving cinnamon buns. Bloody footprints led up the stairs. Blood behind the couch, under cabinets. The bathroom, blood on the toilet, tub, trash can, walls, floor. Someone had tried desperately to clean this scene, but luminol doesn't lie. DNA testing confirmed it. Kelsey's blood, all of it. Lead investigator CBI agent Greg Slater, 37 years on the force, stood in that house, taking it in. His first no-body case in his entire career. The sheer volume of blood was staggering. This isn't a woman who would have left on her own. Kelsey Brethruth never left this house alive. Investigators knew Kelsey was dead, but they had no body, no murder weapon, and Patrick Frazee was sticking to his story. Then, a breakthrough in the cell phone data would lead them 800 miles away to a place Kelsey had never been. The investigation exploded. The FBI and CBI, the Colorado Bureau of Investigation, immediately got involved. Chief Miles D. Young held press conferences as the case gained national attention. On December 15, 2018, a $25,000 reward was offered for information. Vigils were organized throughout Woodland Park. Candlelight ceremonies filled Memorial Park as the community rallied to find Kelsey, but it was surveillance footage that would expose Patrick's lies. A neighbor's security camera pointed toward Kelsey's townhouse. The camera was motion-activated and grainy. It captured about 50% of the movement. But what it did capture proved Patrick had been lying about everything. At 1:24 p.m. on November 22nd, Thanksgiving Day, the footage showed Patrick, Kelsey, and Kaylee entering the condo together. A poinsettia plant was visible in the frame. They didn't meet in an alley. All three went inside the house together. Then the camera captured something chilling. Patrick entering and exiting that townhouse 11 times throughout the day. In later footage, Patrick appeared alone with a large black tote in the bed of his truck. Meanwhile, CBI agent Greg Slater and Kevin Clark, a Colorado Springs PD analyst, pieced together phone records. They created a massive timeline on 6 25-square-foot poster boards, tracking every call, text, and cell tower ping. Both Patrick and Kelsey's phones connected to the same towers from November 22nd through the 25th. Their phones were together for days after Kelsey was last seen publicly. Then something strange happened. On November 25th at 5:13 p.m., Kelsey's phone pinged a tower in Giddings, Idaho, 800 miles from Woodland Park. Kelsey had never been to Idaho in her life. Why was her phone there? As investigators dug deeper, one number kept appearing. Connected to Idaho, connected to the crime scene in Colorado. In constant contact with Patrick, throughout Kelsey's disappearance. The number traced to a 32-year-old nurse from Twin Falls, Idaho, Crystal Lee Kenny, commonly called Crystal. But who was she? What was her connection to Patrick? And why was Kelsey's phone in Idaho pinging towers at the same time as Crystal's phone? On December 20th, 2018, the FBI brought Crystal in for questioning at Colorado Springs Police Department. The interview lasted 4.5 hours. Her story was disjointed, vague, full of holes. She claimed she'd come to Colorado to look at a horse. Said she knew nothing about Kelsey's disappearance. Insisted she didn't know Kelsey or Kaylee. She couldn't explain why her phone pinged near the crime scene. But the evidence told a different story. Crystal's phone had pinged near Kelsey's home at the time of disappearance. Her phone and Kelsey's phone pinged the same Idaho towers at the same time. Blood from an unknown female found in Kelsey's home would later match Crystal's DNA. Phone records showed extensive contact with Patrick. Then, Crystal's best friend came forward. Michelle Stein had known Crystal for over 20 years. Weeks earlier, Crystal had confided something deeply disturbing to Michelle. Michelle contacted investigators. What she told them would blow the case wide open. What Michelle Stein told investigators would reveal a plot so twisted, so calculated, so wicked and evil, that even veteran detectives would struggle to believe it. Because Patrick Frazee hadn't just asked Crystal for help. He'd asked her to kill for him. But why? Crystal, as she was commonly called, was a 32-year-old nurse from Twin Falls. But her connection to Patrick ran deep. They'd met at a Teller County Fair dance back in 2006, when Crystal was just 20 years old. For 13 years, they'd maintained an on-again, off-again relationship. Crystal had recently divorced from Chad Lee, a marriage that lasted 8 years, ending in the summer of 2018. She had 2 children with Chad. In March 2018, Crystal and Patrick's affair rekindled, turning intimate once again. But Patrick kept secrets. For 5 months, he didn't tell Crystal about Kelsey or baby Kaylee. Back in 2016, Crystal had become pregnant by Patrick. When he showed no happiness about it, she got an abortion. Then, in October 2018, Crystal was shocked to learn Patrick had a daughter. But Patrick knew how to manipulate her. He told Crystal that Kelsey was an abusive mother. He claimed Kelsey hit Kaylee with an iron, called her a drug addict, said she was unfit. Patrick painted himself as a protective father, desperate to save his daughter from abuse. And he needed Crystal's help to do it. What happened next would shock even veteran detectives. On September 2018, Patrick asked Crystal to poison Kelsey's Starbucks coffee, specifically a caramel macchiato, Kelsey's favorite. Crystal drove over 750 miles from Idaho to Colorado. She went to Kelsey's door, pretending to be a thankful neighbor, holding the poisoned coffee. But Crystal couldn't go through with it. Patrick was angry, but he told her there'd be another chance. On October 2018, Patrick gave Crystal a metal pipe, told her to hit Kelsey on the head with it, kill her with blunt force trauma. Crystal drove to Colorado again. But once more, she couldn't bring herself to kill someone. Patrick was getting more frustrated. Then, on November 2018, Patrick gave Crystal a baseball bat, told her to wait outside Kelsey's house. When Kelsey came out, swing away, beat her to death right there. Crystal sat on the curb with the bat in her hands, questioning how she'd gotten to this point. Then she left without doing it. At this point, Patrick was beyond furious. He told Crystal he had a bigger heart and cared more about Kaylee than she did. He manipulated her with guilt, making her feel like she was the one failing that little girl. Crystal's best friend, Michelle Stein, would later testify that Crystal had confided about these solicitations. Crystal was fearful for her life, Michelle said. Patrick had threatened Crystal and her family. Michelle believed Crystal was trapped in an abusive relationship. But why was Patrick so desperate? The financial pressures were mounting. A $72,000 loan default. $700 a month in child support unpaid since July. A $400,000 inheritance dispute. And Patrick was the beneficiary on Kelsey's life insurance policy, though it may have lapsed. Patrick was facing financial ruin. 3 times Patrick asked Crystal to kill Kelsey. 3 times she refused. He'd been trying for months to get someone else to do his dirty work. When Crystal wouldn't do it, Patrick Frazee decided he'd handle it himself. Crystal refused 3 times. So on Thanksgiving Day, 2018, Patrick Frazee decided he'd handle it himself. And what Crystal would later testify about, what Patrick confessed to her he did, would be one of the most brutal crimes Colorado had ever seen. But first, he had to be caught. The case was building. With Crystal's cooperation, investigators now had key testimony connecting Patrick to a murder plot. Phone records confirmed Crystal's story. Surveillance footage corroborated the timeline. Blood evidence saturated the crime scene. But still, there was no body. Less than 1 month after Kelsey was reported missing, justice began to move. On December 21st, 2018, Patrick Frazee was arrested at his ranch in Florissant. He was taken into custody without incident and held at Teller County Jail. The charges were severe. First-degree murder after deliberation. 3 counts of solicitation to commit first-degree murder. 1 count for each attempt with Crystal. The poison, the pipe, and the bat. Tampering with a deceased human body. Crime of violence sentence enhancers. In total, Patrick faced 6 felony charges. Patrick pleaded not guilty to all of them. He maintained his innocence. He claimed he didn't know what happened to Kelsey. He stuck to his story about meeting her in an alley to exchange Kaylee, insisting that was the last time he'd seen her. The national news picked up the story. Press conferences filled television screens across the country. Chief Miles DeYoung addressed the media with a statement that brought some relief to the community. "We believe we have arrested the person responsible." Woodland Park reacted with a mixture of shock and cautious hope. Finally, an arrest. Finally, someone was being held accountable. But prosecutors faced a serious dilemma. Crystal Lee Kenny was being questioned extensively, and the question weighing on DA Dan May and his team was, what do we do with her? Crystal had helped cover up the crime. She'd driven hundreds of miles to clean blood from a murder scene. She'd participated in the aftermath. By any measure, Crystal had committed serious crimes, tampering with evidence, obstruction, cover-up. But here was the problem. Crystal was the only person who knew what Patrick told her he did. Without her testimony, there was no body, no confession, no witness to Patrick's account of what happened inside that townhouse on Thanksgiving Day. Without Crystal, getting a conviction would be much, much harder. Patrick's defense would be far stronger if she couldn't testify against him. The prosecutors faced an impossible choice. Let Crystal walk for her crimes in exchange for testimony that could seal Patrick's fate, or charge her fully and risk losing the only witness who could tell the jury what really happened. It was a devil's bargain, and DA Dan May knew it. Prosecutors knew they needed Crystal. Without her testimony, without her account of what Patrick told her he did, their case would be much weaker. So they made a difficult decision that would spark outrage across the country. They made a deal with the devil.
We did a deal with the devil. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about that.
Prosecutors didn't like the deal they made with Crystal Lee, but it did work. Thanks to her, Patrick Frazee will spend the rest of his life in prison for killing his one-time fiancée, the mother of his child, Kelsey Barrett. And today we learned Patrick Frazee has notified the courts he plans to appeal his conviction. Tomorrow, Crystal Lee is back in court to be sentenced for her role in that crime.
Yeah, 9 News reporter Jennifer Meckles now walking us through that plea deal, which could see her spend as many as 3 years in prison.
We're inside Kelsey's apartment with Crystal.
Investigators called Crystal Lee a key witness in the Kelsey Barrett murder case.
When you came in, what did you see?
When I first walked in, I saw blood all over the floor. I saw blood up the wall.
Crystal told investigators that Patrick Frazee beat Kelsey to death with a baseball bat in her home and that she helped clean up the crime scene.
Did you say that you cleaned off some of the appliances?
I did. I wiped there was blood on the front of the dishwasher. There was blood on the front of the stove.
Crystal said she knew Frazee wanted Kelsey dead, that he tried to get her to do it first. She admitted to the cleanup, dumping Kelsey's phone, and helping burn evidence.
This is where the aluminum top was, and this is where the burn occurred.
There's no doubt that the prosecution will ask for the full 3 years, and I suspect the judge will throw whatever books at her he possibly can.
Crystal's cooperation and testimony helped prosecutors put Patrick Frazee behind bars for life. On Tuesday, she will earn her own sentence.
This is not somebody who's going to get probation or even the benefit of the doubt. The reality is that Crystal Lee could have prevented the murder if she'd gone to the authorities the first time she was solicited to kill another human being. She chose not to.
On February 8, 2019, Crystal Lee Kenny stood before a judge and pleaded guilty to one count: tampering with physical evidence. Not murder, not accessory to murder, just tampering with evidence. Her sentence? 3 years in the Colorado Department of Corrections, the maximum for the charge. In exchange, she agreed to full cooperation and testimony against Patrick Frazee. The controversy was immediate. The Barrett family was devastated. Public outrage exploded. Crystal could have prevented the murder by warning Kelsey. She drove 13 hours to clean up blood. She watched a body burn, and she got 3 years? District Attorney Dan May knew how it looked. He addressed it head-on. We made a deal with the devil. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about that. I'm not proud of that. But there's no question Kelsey wouldn't have had sure justice today without making that deal. He added, it's the defendant who picked her, referring to Patrick's choice of Crystal as his accomplice. Without Crystal's testimony, there was no body, no confession, no witness to what Patrick told her he did. Conviction would be far more difficult. Crystal's attorney, Drew Nielsen, argued that Crystal acted out of fear. Patrick had written letters from jail asking an inmate to kill Crystal's family. She had courage to tell truth regardless of expense to herself, Nielsen said. Crystal's friend Laura Stutzman added that Crystal was very, very remorseful and a fantastic mom. Michelle Stein, Crystal's best friend of over 20 years, testified that Crystal had confided in her about the solicitations. Crystal was fearful for her life and her family. Patrick had threatened them. As part of the cooperation agreement, Crystal did a video walkthrough of Kelsey's townhouse. She showed investigators exactly where the blood was and described the cleaning process in chilling detail. Blood all over the floor, she said. Blood up the wall. Blood on the dishwasher, the stove, the coffee maker. Blood on the tin foil covering the cinnamon roll pan. Blood spatter so high up the walls she had to climb to reach it. Bloody footprints at the stairs. Blood behind the couch. Blood throughout the bathroom, the toilet, walls, floor, tub exterior, trash can. Then came Crystal's most disturbing admission. I left blood spots. She claimed she purposely left some blood spots because she wanted Patrick to get caught. She specifically left blood on the fireplace and between floorboards, where bleach couldn't reach. She put towels in the washing machine, but didn't run it. She wanted evidence to remain. The preparation was methodical. Crystal had packed latex gloves, a white cleaning suit, booties, bleach, trash bags, and a hairnet. She'd swapped cars with a friend to avoid detection, changed her work shift to have time, then drove 13 hours overnight from Idaho to Colorado, arriving around 6:30 a.m. on November 24th. During the drive, Patrick told her there was a lot of blood to clean up. He left keys on the gate for her. She cleaned for 3 to 4 hours with bleach, throwing away blood-stained toys and items. The walkthrough showed investigators where the blood was, where Crystal had cleaned for hours trying to erase evidence of violence. But it didn't show them what happened. It didn't show them how Kelsey died. For that, they would need Crystal to take the stand at trial. And what she would testify Patrick told her he did would horrify even the most seasoned investigators. October 28, 2019. Nearly a year after Kelsey vanished, Patrick Frazie's trial began in Cripple Creek at the Teller County Courthouse. Judge Scott Sells presided. After jury selection on October 31st, 9 women and 7 men, plus 4 alternates were seated. Opening statements began November 1st. The prosecution team consisted of DA Dan May, lead prosecutor Beth Reed, and Jennifer Veman. Public defenders Adam Steigerwald and Ashley Fridovich Porter represented Patrick. Over 60 witnesses would testify. Over 600 pieces of evidence would be presented. Cameras were banned. Only sketch artists allowed. Security was extremely tight. Between November 1st and 8th, star witness Crystal Lee Kenny took the stand. For 2 full days, she testified. Prosecutors asked her to tell the jury what Patrick had told her happened that day. Now, for the first time, the full horror would be revealed. According to Crystal's testimony, at 1:24 p.m. on November 22nd, all 3, Patrick, Kelsey, and Kaylee, entered the condo together. Surveillance confirmed it. Phone records showed both phones connected to the same tower from 1 o'clock to 4:30 p.m. Patrick asked Kelsey to smell scented candles he brought. He blindfolded her with a sweater, told her to close her eyes and guess the scent. It was a game, he said. Then he grabbed a baseball bat. Blood pattern expert Jonathan Priest would later testify, people aren't easy to kill. Patrick struck Kelsey 10 to 15 times with that bat. Blood exploded across the living room, spattered on walls, the coffee maker, family portrait, stuffed animals, baby gate. Blood even on the tin foil covering those Thanksgiving cinnamon buns. Blood spatter reached so high, someone had to climb to reach it. Forensic analysis determined Kelsey was on the living room floor when struck. Some of her teeth were knocked out during the attack. Kaylee, 1 year old, was in her jumper in the next room, just feet away while her mother was being beaten to death. According to Patrick's confession to Crystal, Kelsey begged, "Please stop." But Patrick didn't stop. Not until Kelsey Barrett, 29-year-old pilot, devoted mother, beloved daughter, was dead on her living room floor. Patrick later told Crystal, "It wasn't humane." He also said, "You don't know how hard it is to have Thanksgiving dinner after killing her." Because that's exactly what he did. Killed Kelsey, then sat down with his family for Thanksgiving dinner. Surveillance captured Patrick making 11 trips in and out of the townhouse. He forced Kelsey's body into a black plastic tote, took it to Nash Ranch where he had grazing lease and barn access, and temporarily hid it there. He went to Walmart with Kaylee and bought a gas can, topped up his truck, called his mother Sheila and Crystal. Crystal understood the code. "You have a mess to clean up." Patrick arrived nearly 3 hours late to family Thanksgiving dinner and sat down to eat while Kelsey's body lay hidden. Other witnesses painted a damning picture. Cheryl testified Patrick never called when Kelsey was missing, never checked on Kaylee, showed no concern. Joseph Moore, Patrick's friend, testified about an April 2018 conversation 7 months before the murder. Patrick had told Moore, "I figured out a way to kill her." Moore replied, "Don't even talk about things like that." Patrick grinned. "No body, no crime, right?" Moore thought it was a dark joke. Now he realized Patrick had been planning this for months. Forensic testimony detailed the carnage. DNA analysts confirmed the blood throughout the house matched Kelsey's profile. Blood pattern experts described spatter consistent with multiple strikes to the head while the victim was on the floor. Crystal's testimony continued with the cover-up. On November 24th, she and Patrick drove to Nash Ranch to retrieve the body in the tote. They brought it back to Patrick's ranch in Florissant, placed the tote in an aluminum water trough with no bottom, poured 5 gallons of gasoline over it, added motor oil as accelerant. Patrick collected wood, set it on fire. Crystal threw in Kelsey's Bible and some of Kaylee's toys. The fire burned for hours. Patrick's mother, Sheila, stood on the porch and watched. She could be seen between 2 trees, looking toward the burn area, witnessing her son burning Kelsey's body. She did nothing to stop it. Never called police. Crystal drove back to Idaho with Kelsey's phone and gun. On November 25th, she sent fake texts from Kelsey's phone to her boss, to Patrick, to Cheryl. A critical mistake? She turned the phone on in Idaho. It pinged Giddings, Idaho towers, 800 miles from Woodland Park, at the same time as Crystal's phone. This became key evidence. Crystal destroyed the phone by burning it. Twin Falls police later found charred pieces 500 feet from her home. Patrick had made 19 calls pretending to be Kelsey between November 22nd and December 4th. Patrick and Crystal spoke for over 9 hours total during the cover-up. Additional evidence mounted. Surveillance showed Patrick filling a 5-gallon container with gasoline. He'd gone to a Verizon store, asking if they could recover data from a broken phone, trying to establish an innocent explanation. FBI searches of the ranch turned up teeth in multiple rooms, a sheet with bloodstains, a burn scar visible in gravel, a partial human tooth at the burn site, and bloodhound dogs hitting on a hay bale with decomposition smell. A jailhouse inmate testified Patrick had passed him toilet paper notes with a hit list. Crystal Lee Kenny, Chad Lee, Michelle Stein, Joseph Moore, and CBI agent Greg Slater. One note read, "I'd really like to see Crystal with a bullet in her head. No video, no weapon, nobody, no forensics." Patrick was trying to orchestrate murders from jail. The Barrett family sobbed and held each other. Father Darrell nodded with each revelation. Jurors were visibly shaken. Patrick sat stone-faced, showing no emotion. When please stop testimony came, audible gasps filled the courtroom. The jury had heard everything. The blindfold, the bat, Kelsey's last words, the burning, Sheila watching from the porch, the jailhouse hit list, every horrific detail. And now, after weeks of testimony, after hearing from over 60 witnesses, they had to decide, was Patrick Frazee guilty of murder? On November 18, 2019, closing arguments began. Lead prosecutor Beth Reed told the jury the evidence was compelling and overwhelming. No body, no crime. That's what the defendant has been banking on. But they had Crystal's testimony, forensics, phone records, and surveillance. Public defender Adam Steigerwald argued it was circumstantial. If it is your plan to murder someone, you don't tell half the people you know. He tried to poke holes in Crystal's credibility. Patrick chose not to testify. The defense called 0 witnesses. The jury deliberated less than 4 hours. Monday, November 18, 2019. The verdict: guilty on all 6 counts. First-degree murder. 3 counts: solicitation, tampering with a deceased human body, crime of violence. Patrick sat stone-faced. The Barrett family sobbed. Father Darrell nodded solemnly with each guilty count. Sentencing immediately followed. Judge Scott Sells presided, his voice cracking with emotion. A relative read Cheryl's victim impact statement. Patrick had tortured to death Kelsey. The family lived in fear for months. Thanksgiving was now the anniversary of their daughter's death forever. Kaylee will eventually know the story, how she was present during the torture and murder of her mother. Kaylee, now 2, still called out for Mama at night. Despite everything, the family chose not to seek the death penalty. We believe in a forgiving Savior and hope that Patrick will take this opportunity to repent. Judge Sells addressed Patrick. Your actions were vicious, senseless, without reason or explanation. Kelsey spent her last night caring for you, and you beat her. You burned her body like a piece of trash. Your crimes deserve absolute maximum punishment, and I intend to do that. The sentence: life without parole, plus 156 years, plus 12 years, plus 5 years parole. Patrick was escorted out. He will never be free. December 9, 2019. Transferred to Denver Reception Diagnostic Center. December 17, Colorado State Penitentiary. December 19, Arkansas Valley Correctional Facility, Ordway, where he remains as of 2025. In 2020, Patrick wrote CBS 4, "I didn't do it. I want my daughter to know I did not kill her mother." In 2023, the Colorado Court of Appeals denied his appeal. Patrick Frazee will die in prison. But Crystal's sentence sparked outrage. January 28, 2020, Crystal Lee Kenny sentenced to 3 years for tampering with evidence. The Barrett family said the only thing she didn't do was swing the bat. An online petition with nearly 9,000 signatures demanded she stay in prison. Attorney Drew Nielsen argued Crystal acted out of fear. Patrick had written jail letters asking an inmate to kill Crystal's family. Judge Sells told Crystal, "You could have warned her. You could have called law enforcement. You could have prevented the murder." Her actions were cold, calculating, cruel, and devoid. He disagreed with the light sentence, but was bound by law. February 2021. Appeals Court ruled 3 years exceeded maximum. March 23, 2021. Resentenced to 18 months. March 25, 2021. Released on parole after serving 14 to 18 months. DA Dan May defended the deal. "We made a deal with the devil. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about that. I'm not proud of that. But there's no question Kelsey wouldn't have had sure justice today without making that deal." One detective reflected, "Crystal did some horrific things. But without Crystal, we wouldn't be where we are today." Another said, "I'm still torn between empathy and being appalled by what she did." 2 people convicted. Patrick got life plus 156 years. Crystal walked free after less than 2 years. Justice had been served in the courtroom. But for Cheryl and the Barrett family, one painful reality remained. They had no body to bury, no grave to visit, no place to lay flowers and mourn. Kelsey had been reduced to ash and scattered across a Colorado ranch, leaving her family with nothing but memories, and a little girl who would grow up without her mother. Lead investigator CBI agent Greg Slater, 37 years on the force, faced his first no-body case. The hardest part wasn't solving it, it was what came after. "How do I tell Cheryl?" he said. "How do you tell a mother and father that your daughter's been burned? I couldn't do it." No remains were ever found, nothing to bury. Investigators sifted through Midway landfill in Fountain, Colorado, for over a month. They found nothing. Kelsey's body had been completely destroyed. The family has no grave to visit, nowhere to lay flowers, nowhere to mourn. After Patrick's arrest, an emergency custody hearing was held. Patrick's parents, including Sheila, fought for custody. Despite Sheila watching the burning, they wanted Kaylee. The judge ruled, Kaylee stays with maternal grandparents Cheryl and Daryl Barrett. Permanent custody was awarded January 2019. Kaylee is now 8 years old, living with Cheryl, being raised with love. Sheila Frazee was never charged. She watched the burning from her porch. She pleaded the fifth at Patrick's preliminary hearing. Prosecutors wanted to question her about the phone call, witnessing the burn and evidence disposal. No charges were filed. She walked away free. Woodland Park, a town of 8,000, was forever changed. Volunteers rehabilitated Kelsey's townhouse, donating skills and materials. This is our way of showing Woodland Park isn't about Patrick Frazee. It's about good people. Annual vigils continue at Memorial Park. Candlelight ceremonies mark every November 22nd. The community ensures Kelsey is never forgotten. No grave, no remains, nothing but memories and a little girl who would grow up without her mother. But Kelsey Barrett was so much more than what was done to her, and her legacy would ensure she'd never be forgotten. Kelsey Barrett may not have a grave, but her memory soars in the lives she touched. Her uncle Scott Morin remembered her hugs. Not only was she loved, but she loved everyone else. Her boss Raymond Sebring said her stature did not reflect her heart or character. Despite her small frame, she could intimidate large football players in the cockpit. There was no doubt who was in charge. Co-worker Chris Paulhamus called her a quiet, unassuming, beautiful, gentle soul. It's important for Kaylee to know how amazing her mother was. David Duray, I'll remember her kindness and smile the most. Kelsey's legacy lives on in concrete ways. An observation tower at Doss Aviation in Pueblo bears her name. An aviation scholarship was established in her honor. Patrick was court-ordered to fund it. A memorial bench sits in Memorial Park. 80 flight instructors performed a missing man formation flyover at a private ceremony. Dollar bills signed by grateful students still mark her memory. On her desk sat a Bible calendar. The last page she opened, November 21st, 2018, Philippians 2:13, "For it is God who works in you." Prosecutor Jennifer Veman said simply, she mattered. CBI agent Greg Slater reflected, I can't fathom why Patrick did it. She was so well respected, revered, appreciated. How dedicated to not only her daughter, but to her country. I hope if Kelsey's soul has ability, she knows people did care. We all cared. She was and still is important. She always will be. Cheryl chose forgiveness over hate, keeping Kelsey's memory alive every day. Kaylee is being raised surrounded by love and stories of her mother's strength. This was a senseless murder, no clear motive. But what is clear, Kelsey Barrett mattered. She was a daughter, mother, pilot, teacher, friend. Her memory flies on. Kelsey's story is one we must never forget. Not just a tragedy, but a reminder to trust our instincts and recognize warning signs before it's too late. If you or someone you know is experiencing domestic violence, resources are available. I've included links in the description below. If this case moved you, please share it so others can know Kelsey's story. Subscribe to this channel to help keep victim stories alive. Every view, every share ensures Kelsey Barrett is remembered. Leave a comment. Where are you watching from? Did you know about this case? Thank you to the investigators who never gave up searching for truth. Thank you to the Woodland Park community that came together for Kelsey. And thank you for watching and remembering. Kelsey Barrett, September 15th, 1989, November 22nd, 2018, forever 29. Forever a pilot. Forever a mother. Forever remembered.
Would come home for most holidays that she could, or we'd go there, and even when she wasn't, she called home every Sunday to talk to my grandmother that lives across the field. David is his name. They had been dating for a few years at that point, before she even started law school. So they had broken up at some point and then gotten back together there, and my uncle walked over, he lives across the street, and was kind of standing in the corner, and he said, well, did you check the news? And we're like, no. And what is it? What is it? Well, did you check? And my aunt was like, you need to just tell us what you're talking about. And he said, they found a body. And everyone was just hysterical. And then really quickly, like, well, who found it? Where? What? Never did I doubt that was her body, but that was my mom's first, are you sure it's her? Like, could it be,
This all happened so quickly.
Yeah, it was, which honestly is a very good thing. When they found her body, the trash was supposed to have already picked it up at that point.
In June 2011, The quiet college town of Macon, Georgia was shattered by one of the most disturbing crimes investigators had ever worked. A law student vanished from a locked apartment, and what police discovered would expose a predator who had been hiding in plain sight. June 30th, 2011. Police officers stood inside apartment number 2 at Barristers Hall, a building reserved exclusively for law students. They'd been called about a missing woman, 27-year-old Lauren Giddings. Her car was still parked outside, her phone, her purse, her laptop, all left behind. The door had been locked. No forced entry, no signs of a struggle. But her friends knew something was very, very wrong. The officers made a decision. They would use luminol, a chemical that reacts with blood and glows blue in the dark, even after someone has tried to clean it away. They started in the living room, sprayed the walls, the carpet, nothing, the bedroom, sprayed every surface, clean, the kitchen, counters, floors, still nothing. Maybe she really had just left. Maybe she was staying somewhere else. Maybe. Then they entered the bathroom. They killed the lights, sprayed the luminol into the tub, and the entire bathtub exploded in brilliant glowing blue. The officers stepped back. One of them would later say he'd never seen anything like it. The tub hadn't just had blood in it. It had been full of blood. Someone had scrubbed this bathroom down to the tile, bleached it, tried to erase every trace. But luminol doesn't lie. This wasn't a missing person case anymore. In that moment, they knew. They were looking for Lauren Giddings' body. And when officers followed the smell of decomposition to a trash bin in the parking lot, what they found would confirm their worst fears. But to understand how it came to this, how a promising law student ended up murdered in her own apartment, we need to go back to 3 days earlier, when Lauren sent an email that would prove she was right to be afraid. If you're new here, subscribe so you don't miss cases like this, and let me know in the comments where you're watching from. 3 days earlier, June 25th, 2011. Late into the evening, well after 10 p.m., Lauren Giddings sat in her apartment at Barristers Hall and typed out an email to her boyfriend, David. She was scared. According to the email, things had been happening in her apartment. Strange things. When she came home after being out, items would be moved. Not drastically, just enough to notice. A book in a different spot. Her belongings slightly rearranged. And there was this energy she couldn't quite explain. This feeling that someone had been there, that someone was watching her. But here's what made it even more unsettling. There were no signs of forced entry. Her door was always locked when she returned. The windows were secure. She had no idea how someone could be getting in. She couldn't prove it, friends would later say. But Lauren was convinced someone was breaking into her apartment. David tried to reassure her. He told her it was probably just some hoodlums messing around outside, not actually intent on doing anything. And besides, she'd been working so hard, barely leaving her apartment. Maybe she was going a little stir-crazy without realizing it. Lauren Teresa Giddings was 27 years old. She'd just graduated from the Walter F. George School of Law at Mercer University, one of the oldest law schools in the United States. Now she was deep into preparation for the Georgia bar exam, scheduled for July. Every spare second went into studying. Apart from the occasional trip to church or a quick workout, she barely left her second-floor apartment in Barristers Hall, the law student housing directly across from campus. She was in a long-distance relationship with David Van Diver, a corporate lawyer in Atlanta who was about 20 years her senior. And in just 5 days, on June 30th, she was supposed to move out of Macon and move in with him. Start the next chapter of her life. But first, she had to get through the bar exam. Lauren sent out a mass message to her friends. "Hey guys, I'm hunkering down to study for the bar. Please don't be offended if I don't respond to texts or emails." And then, silence. In the days that followed, no one heard from her. Her best friend Katie tried to check in, no response. Her sister Caitlin, who'd just gotten married and was on her honeymoon, kept sharing photos with Lauren. Nothing. No replies, no reactions. At first, it seemed understandable. Lauren had warned everyone she'd be unavailable. But as the days passed, something started to feel wrong. It didn't feel like she was just focusing on other things, Caitlin would later say. It started to feel like something was wrong. On the morning of June 30th, Caitlin called a fellow student named Ashley. She asked her to stop by Lauren's apartment and check on her sister. Before driving over, Ashley tried calling Lauren. The phone went straight to voicemail. Ashley and her boyfriend pulled up to Barrister's Hall. Lauren's car was still parked outside in its assigned spot. That was a good sign, right? Maybe she was just inside, buried in her books. Ashley used a spare key to unlock the door. Inside, Lauren's belongings were strewn everywhere. But that didn't immediately seem odd. Lauren was supposed to be packing. She was moving out soon. Then Ashley saw the calendar on the wall. June 30th, moving day. Lauren was supposed to move out today, this morning. She was supposed to be loading up her car and driving to Atlanta to start her new life with David. But she wasn't here. Ashley looked around more carefully now. On the table, Lauren's purse, her law books, her cell phone, her laptop. Things everybody could agree she would never just disappear without taking. So where was she? Ashley immediately called friends who lived in the same complex. Lauren's ex-boyfriend Joe started searching the university campus. Everyone fanned out, looking for any sign of her. The consensus was that the last time anyone had heard from Lauren was at an end-of-year party 4 days ago, on June 26th. She'd left the morning after the party, and everything had seemed fine. And just a few hours later, she'd sent that email to David, the one about being afraid in her apartment. After searching through the night with no luck, it was time to call the police. And Lauren's family, back in Maryland, got in their car and started the almost 12-hour drive to Georgia. Where was Lauren Giddings? And why would she vanish without a trace, leaving behind her phone, her car, and everything she needed to start her new life with David? When officers arrived at Barrister's Hall around 9 a.m., they entered Lauren's apartment and immediately began their assessment. No signs of forced entry, no signs of a struggle. Nothing appeared to have been stolen, but something was definitely wrong. The officers made the decision to use luminol, and that's when they discovered the blood in her bathroom. The entire bathtub had been full of it. Now, standing outside in the parking lot, police were regrouping, forming a new plan. It was a hot day, typical for Georgia in late June, and there was a strong breeze blowing through the complex. Then, as officers stood near the trash bins discussing their next steps, a gust of wind came along and forced a smell in their direction. They all stopped talking. It was distinctive, unmistakable, the smell of human decomposition. One officer would later describe it. We all smell things in life that smell bad, but that smell of a body or a decomposing body is one of the worst things you'll ever smell. Police moved quickly to the trash bins. They opened the lids, and they made a grisly discovery that would stick with them forever. Inside one of the bins, wrapped in a black plastic bag, was a female torso. Testing would be needed to confirm the identity, but given what they'd just found in Lauren's bathroom with the luminol, officers strongly believed this was part of Lauren Giddings' body. One officer stood there staring at what had been done. "Who could have done this?" he said. Because truthfully, only a monster could do something like that. It was absolutely horrible. And then, someone noticed something. In a weird twist of fate, the police cars that had arrived that morning were parked in a way that blocked the entrance to the complex. The trash removal van couldn't get in, and trash collection had been scheduled for that very morning. If police hadn't been there at that moment, blocking things off, one detective noted, everything would have been gone by the time we started searching. The evidence would have disappeared forever. Testing soon confirmed what they feared. The torso belonged to Lauren Giddings. The medical examiner's findings showed no signs of sexual assault. The cause of death would later be determined as asphyxiation from strangulation. Based on the condition of the remains, she was believed to have been killed and dismembered on June 26th, the same day she'd left that party. Back in Lauren's apartment, investigators were dusting the bathroom for fingerprints. Whoever had done this had scrubbed the place down. A thorough, meticulous cleanup. Only the luminol had been able to pick up what they'd tried to hide. Police immediately cordoned off the entire complex, and they made a critical decision. They would keep the discovery under wraps for now. If the killer was someone in this building, someone who lived here, they didn't want to alert them to the fact that they'd just found Lauren's body. Tipping them off could cause them to run, or worse, destroy more evidence. But who could have done this? And, more importantly, were they still close by, watching the investigation unfold? Investigators now had a murder case, and they needed to find who was responsible. One officer explained their approach. You have to look at who is closest to the victim, either romantically or geographically. Everyone who'd been involved in the initial search for Lauren was asked to come in and give a statement. First, there was Ashley, the fellow student who discovered Lauren was missing. She had a spare key to Lauren's apartment. She'd been one of the last people to see Lauren at the party 4 days earlier. Police brought her in for questioning. Then there was Joe, Lauren's ex-boyfriend, also a Mercer Law student. Lauren had briefly dated him after breaking up with David. When she'd reconciled with David, she'd called things off with Joe. According to friends, Joe had been pretty upset about the breakup, but they'd remained good friends afterward. Joe had even helped search for Lauren, accessing her computer to look for clues. He was called in for a statement. And then there was David Van Diver, Lauren's long-distance partner, a corporate lawyer in Atlanta, approximately 20 years older than her. He'd been planning to propose. Lauren was supposed to move in with him on June 30th, the very day she was reported missing. But where had he really been? Did the distance cause problems between them? Police called him in for questioning. Investigators began systematically checking alibis. David Van Diver was not only devastated by the news, he'd been on a golfing trip in California. His alibi checked out completely. It was quite obvious he was not at all involved. He was quickly ruled out. Joe was cooperative, helpful, clearly distraught. He was ruled out. Ashley was obviously devastated. She'd been desperately trying to help find Lauren. She was ruled out. With the people closest to Lauren eliminated, authorities expanded their focus. They wanted to search every apartment in the block, start eliminating people systematically. They asked for permission to search all units in Barrister's Hall. Everyone was happy to cooperate. Everyone opened their doors and let police search. Everyone except one person. One resident refused to allow the search. A 25-year-old man who lived in apartment 4. A fellow law student at Mercer, also preparing for the bar exam. Police weren't releasing his name yet, but they had to wonder, why would this be an issue? Everyone agreed to help find Lauren. Everyone cooperated with police, except one person. Why would anyone refuse to help find a missing woman? What was he hiding? The person who refused was a man named Stephen Timothy McDaniel. He was 25 years old. A fellow Mercer Law School student, also preparing for the Georgia bar exam. He lived in apartment 4 at Barrister's Hall, right next door to Lauren in apartment 2. They'd been neighbors since their first year of law school back in 2008. 3 years living side by side. And here's what made his refusal even stranger. Stephen had actually been present during the initial searches for Lauren. He'd been walking around with her friends, looking for clues, acting concerned. Police had already asked him to come to the station hours earlier to give a statement. So when officers asked to search his apartment along with everyone else's, they were surprised by his response. "It's the lawyer in me," Stephen said. "I'm just always protective of my space." Police found this reasoning odd given the circumstances. A woman was dead. Her body had just been found. And he lived right next door. But it was his behavior over the next several hours that really started raising eyebrows among investigators. Stephen had participated in the initial searches for Lauren with her friends. Now he was refusing to cooperate with the official police investigation. Yet he was loitering around the investigation site all day long, watching everything everyone was doing, walking around after police as they went in and out of other people's apartments. He was both refusing to help and making sure he was involved with everything. Officers noted his behavior was looking odd. They started keeping a close eye on apartment 4. Meanwhile, the other suspects were being definitively eliminated. David Van Dyker's alibi checked out. He'd been in California on a golfing trip. Not only was he devastated, it was quite obvious he was not at all involved. Joe was much the same, cooperative, helpful, clearly ruled out. Ashley was obviously trying to help and upset about Lauren's disappearance. Police continued searching the rest of the block, but their focus was narrowing. Something wasn't adding up about the resident in apartment 4. One officer observed what he called a suspicious behavior pattern. As the investigation continued, the press started arriving at the complex. Reporters were beginning to interview residents, asking people what they knew about Lauren Giddings' disappearance, and Stephen McDaniel would be one of the first people to talk to them. What was Stephen McDaniel hiding in apartment 4? And then he did something that would change everything. He decided to go on camera and talk to the press about his missing neighbor. That afternoon, local news reporters arrived at Barrister's Hall. They were interviewing residents about the missing law student, asking if anyone had seen or heard anything. Several people were being questioned, but one person didn't wait to be asked. Stephen McDaniel was the first to approach the reporters and volunteer to talk. Standing in front of the cameras, Stephen appeared calm and articulate. He introduced himself as Lauren's next-door neighbor and explained that everyone was just trying to find out where she was. He said no one had seen her since the end-of-year party on Saturday. When asked about Lauren, Stephen described her as nice, personable, very much a people person. He said she had no enemies that he knew of. Stephen offered his theory about what might have happened. Perhaps someone had grabbed her while she was out running. He explained how friends had checked her apartment with a spare key, mentioning specific details like the door jamb near her entrance and the fact that there were no signs of forced entry. Then the reporter asked about activity in the parking lot. The reporter had seen police working near the trash bins and asked if Stephen had seen anything there. And that's when everything changed. Stephen's face shifted. His entire demeanor transformed. He became visibly agitated, uncomfortable. He started talking about how they didn't know if it was the same person, that police had taken out a body earlier. The reporter noticed something was very wrong and asked if he was okay. Stephen's response would be replayed millions of times. "I think I need to sit down." He sat down on the curb. And then he just froze, staring into space with a completely vacant expression. He remained there, motionless, for an extended period. What made this moment so disturbing was that at this point, only a few people knew what police had actually found in that trash bin. The discovery was being kept quiet. Yet here was Stephen, inserting himself into the media coverage and having what appeared to be a breakdown on camera. In a second interview later that day, Stephen revealed even more suspicious information. He told reporters about an email Lauren had sent, how she'd written to someone in Atlanta after 10 o'clock at night, expressing fear about being in her apartment. She thought someone had tried to break in on Thursday night. She was afraid to stay there. When asked where he'd learned this information, Stephen said Joe had accessed Lauren's computer and they'd read the email together. But how did Stephen know such specific details about Lauren's private fears? Why did he have such detailed knowledge of an email she'd sent to her boyfriend? And why did the mention of a body make him collapse on camera? Something was very wrong, and police were about to find out just how wrong.
And no one's heard from her since.
Did you see her hang out with anyone at the time, anything like that?
No one has seen her since Saturday. I haven't seen anything. You always hear noise outside, but it's just people walking by pretty much.
And she just recently graduated from Mercer?
Yeah, she and I were both JD students. We graduated back in May.
What kind of person was she? What did you see?
She's as nice as can be. Very personable, very much a people person.
Do you know anybody any enemies she might have had, somebody that might want to hurt her?
No, we don't know where she is. The only thing we can think is that maybe she went out running and someone snatched her. Because we went over. One of her friends had a key. We went inside and tried to see if there was anything amiss, but she had a door jamb that was sitting right by it, so there was no sign that anyone broke in. The door was locked when everyone got here. We just don't know where she is.
What about in the parking lot area? I know they've been doing a lot of. I think that's where they have recovered the body or whatever they recovered from there.
Body?
Had you seen anything there? Had you seen anything there? We don't know if this is the same person. You know what I mean? Like, they took out a body there earlier. We don't know if it's the same person or not. So that's why we're trying to ask people if they know who lived there. Are you okay, sir?
I think I need to sit down.
Okay.
But before we go any further, we need to understand who Lauren Giddings really was. Lauren Teresa Giddings was born to parents Karen and Bill Giddings. She was the oldest of 3 sisters. Her younger siblings were Sarah and Caitlin. The family was incredibly close, always supporting each other through everything. There was a running joke in the family that the real star wasn't any of them, but Lauren's dog, Butterbean, who was her constant companion. Lauren had always been driven, always ambitious. Her dream was to become a public defender. She wanted to help people who couldn't afford legal representation. She wanted to fight for people who couldn't fight for themselves. In the spring of 2008, Lauren made the move from Maryland to Macon, Georgia, to pursue that dream. She enrolled at the Walter F. George School of Law at Mercer University, one of the oldest law schools in the United States, founded in 1873. Residents described Macon as slow and relaxing, a place where everybody was welcoming, where you never met a stranger. It was generally a quiet and peaceful place to live and study. And Lauren gelled with her new home instantly. She'd met David Van Diver 4 years earlier at his Atlanta law firm. He was a corporate lawyer, approximately 20 years older than her. But despite the age difference, they had so much in common. David said she was wise beyond her years. They clicked right away. They shared the same work ethic, the same dry but also silly sense of humor. They supported each other through some very challenging personal and professional times. David described Lauren as outspoken, intelligent, and very level-headed. She even managed to charm his very protective older sister, something David joked nobody had managed to do before. What Lauren didn't know was that David was planning to propose. He'd already chosen the perfect spot, but the vast distance between Atlanta and Macon had made the relationship difficult. They briefly broke up because of it. During that time, Lauren started seeing Joe, another Mercer law student. But she quickly realized she still loved David. She really wanted to make the long-distance relationship work. So she called things off with Joe to reconcile with David. Joe was pretty upset about the breakup, but they remained good friends. In June 2011, Lauren graduated from Mercer Law School. Naturally, Butterbean was there to watch her graduate, along with David and her entire family. Lauren was looking forward to taking everything she'd learned and throwing herself into the next chapter of her life. After graduation, she attended her sister Caitlin's wedding back in Maryland. She told people that after this, she really needed time to knuckle down and focus on preparing for the bar exam. The family knew it was the last time they'd be together for a while, which made Caitlin's big day even more special. It was bittersweet, knowing Lauren would be isolated studying for months. In the law firm where she'd briefly trained, Lauren was always known for wearing bright colors, especially pink. In a profession known for black pinstripes, she stood out. A close friend said her choice of color in a famously monochromatic working environment always made people smile and started conversations. She immersed herself in a profession known for black pinstripes, and pink was her way of saying, "Bring it on" to the world. Friends said that summed Lauren Giddings up perfectly. She made herself hard to miss and was unapologetic about it. Driven, a go-getter, ready to take on anything that came her way. But there was someone in her life who would prove to be a dark shadow over all of this. From the minute Lauren and Stephen McDaniel started living next door to each other in 2008, their first year of law school, Lauren had really tried hard to be his friend and be supportive. She even stopped to introduce him to her mother Karen when Karen visited. Lauren had seen Stephen hurriedly walking alone around the complex and wanted to make him feel included. Karen Giddings met Stephen again on the eve of graduation in June 2011. Her impression stayed with her. She thought there was something about him. She found it odd that he always kept his windows and curtains closed. You never saw him. After speaking to him that second time, Karen couldn't help but think about him living next to Lauren. It made her uneasy. And as nice as Lauren was trying to be, Stephen had the same effect on her that he did on most people. He just made her feel uncomfortable. In an email Lauren wrote to David back in 2008, the same year she moved in, she spoke about Stephen's behavior. She wrote about butting heads with him in class. In the email, she said she'd gotten the stink eye from him, that he was out to get her. Stephen had definitely taken a shine to Lauren. He asked her to go out on a date multiple times, but aside from being in a relationship with David, she just wasn't interested in him like that. From that point on, she was only being polite if she saw him, but she was definitely keeping her distance. Lauren's instincts about Stephen McDaniel were right. She felt uncomfortable around him. She kept her distance, but she had no idea just how right her instincts were. Because for months, Stephen had been doing something unthinkable, and he had the perfect tool to do it. Back at the investigation, police were still trying to get answers from Stephen McDaniel. He'd refused to let them search his apartment for hours, but eventually he relented. When officers finally entered apartment 4, what they found immediately raised eyebrows. Food stockpiled throughout the apartment, energy drinks everywhere, a collection of various weapons. The living conditions were generally odd. Then police started looking through drawers. They found a variety of things, including condoms. When officers pulled them out to examine, Stephen mumbled something about being a virgin and saving himself for marriage. He started talking about being on the dating site eHarmony, saying he wasn't having much luck getting dates. He was acting very strangely about the condoms. Police were confused. Why would someone saving themselves for marriage have condoms? That's when Stephen muttered something that changed everything. He admitted to breaking into 2 neighboring apartments. He claimed he'd randomly decided to steal the condoms, but he also mentioned stealing underwear from apartments. With his own admission, Stephen had confessed to breaking into other people's homes, just feet away from where Lauren had lived. Multiple break-ins, multiple apartments. Based on this confession alone, police arrested him for burglary and brought him in for further questioning. Even without murder charges yet, they had him on felony burglary. That evening, local news reported that Macon police were following several leads in the case, but had no official suspects. They noted that Lauren Giddings' neighbor, 25-year-old Stephen McDaniel, remained in jail on unrelated burglary charges. Police were continuing to gather statements in what they called a detailed, painstaking process. As Stephen sat in custody, a deeper search of his apartment continued, and investigators found the tool Lauren had feared, the one Stephen had been using for months. A master key, a key that could get into every room in the complex, every single apartment at Barrister's Hall, including Lauren's apartment. How he'd gotten it was never fully explained. Possibly stolen from maintenance, possibly duplicated. Only maintenance staff and building management were supposed to have these keys. But now it all made sense. Lauren had told David in that email that someone was coming into her apartment, things being moved around when she was out. A weird energy she couldn't explain. No signs of forced entry. She had no idea how it could be happening. She was right. Stephen McDaniel had been breaking into her apartment for months. using the master key to unlock her door while she was out, coming and going as he pleased, moving her things, watching her belongings, violating her most private space. She had every reason to be afraid. He was now in custody for burglary. Police had confirmed he'd had access to her apartment through the master key. He'd been breaking in for months. But one question hung heavy in the air. Breaking into her apartment was one thing. Stealing her underwear was disturbing. But had Stephen McDaniel done something far, far worse? Police were about to bring him in for questioning. And what happened in that interrogation room would be unlike anything they had ever seen. Detective Chris Patterson sat down across from Stephen McDaniel in an interrogation room at the Bibb County Sheriff's Office. Patterson was the lead investigator on the case, and he was determined to get answers. What unfolded over the next several hours would be one of the most bizarre interrogations he'd ever conducted. Patterson started with basic questions, establishing that Stephen knew who he was and remembered their earlier conversation. He showed Stephen a photo of Lauren and asked if he knew her. Stephen confirmed he did. She was Lauren Giddings, his neighbor. They'd been friends. But as the questioning continued, a pattern emerged. When Patterson asked for help understanding what happened to Lauren, Stephen's response was always the same. I don't know. Did he know what happened to her? I don't know. Did he care that no one could find her? I don't know. Patterson told him about the body found in the trash can. A white female, right next to their apartment building. They were confident it was Lauren. Who would do something like that to someone and throw them in a trash can? Stephen's answer, I don't know. The detective pressed harder. Lauren's family wanted to know where she was. What should he tell them? I don't know. But it wasn't just Stephen's refusal to answer that disturbed investigators. It was his mannerisms. Police said they'd never seen anyone respond this way in an interview before. Stephen sat almost perfectly still the entire time, barely even moving his head. Officers had to repeatedly ask him to look them in the eyes. When the interview footage was later sped up, it highlighted just how eerily still he sat, how unusual it looked compared to the detective's natural movements. Even when detectives left the room, Stephen remained in the same position, staring straight ahead. No fidgeting, no shifting weight, no normal human micro-expressions. He appeared almost catatonic, completely flat effect. Detective Patterson's frustration mounted. Stephen's constant repetition of no and I don't know was grating. There was no doubt in Patterson's mind that this was the person behind what happened to Lauren. Finally, the detective lost his patience. He confronted Stephen about appearing on the news, giving media reports that Lauren's mother had seen, running his mouth to reporters. But now, in this room, he suddenly didn't know anything? Patterson called him out directly, asked him point blank, Did you hurt Lauren? No. What did you do to Lauren? I didn't do anything. Hours passed. It was now past midnight, and they were no further forward in getting answers. Stephen maintained his robotic responses the entire time. During the examination, investigators also noted something physical. Stephen had 2 scratches just above his hip, possibly defensive wounds from a struggle. They were never definitively explained. While Stephen sat motionless in the interrogation room, refusing to give any answers, police were turning his apartment upside down. And what they found on his computer would reveal just how deep his obsession with Lauren Giddings had become. As the interrogation dragged on through the night, the search of Stephen's apartment continued. And piece by piece, a disturbing picture began to emerge. Police found packaging for a hacksaw, along with a receipt showing Stephen had purchased it. But the hacksaw itself wasn't in the apartment. Where was it? They discovered several flash drives. Forensic analysis would later reveal graphic and disturbing images and videos of children, child sexual exploitation material. Defense attorney Floyd Buford, who had over 20 years of experience, would later describe them as the most horrific child pornographic photos he'd ever seen. In a drawer, police found a pair of underwear. DNA testing confirmed it belonged to Lauren Giddings. Was this something Stephen had stolen during one of his break-ins, like the condoms? Or was it a trophy from something far worse? Then investigators began examining Stephen's computers. His laptop, his desktop, and his search history revealed patterns that were deeply disturbing. Stephen had been obsessed with Lauren's online presence. He was constantly on her social media profiles, Facebook, anywhere she had a digital footprint. He checked them multiple times per day, looking at her photos repeatedly. But what made it even more sinister was that he would be searching her profiles at the same time he was viewing violent pornography. Split-screen activity, Lauren's profile in one window, violent sexual content in another. He searched her name while watching this material. Investigators also found that Stephen had written blogs about torturing and killing women. He was sharing his depraved fantasies on online forums, in communities where he discussed violent acts against women. It was all deeply disturbing, given the sheer volume of searches he'd made for Lauren's name, hundreds of them, nearly daily, going back months or even years. It was clear Stephen had been obsessed with her. And then investigators found something that showed premeditation. In his most recent search history, just days before Lauren's disappearance, Stephen had been searching for Macon's trash collection times, the municipal waste pickup schedule, when bins would be emptied, which routes covered which areas. He'd been planning this. Back in the interrogation room, Detective Patterson returned armed with this information. He confronted Stephen directly. The detective told him it was over. The game was up. They knew what he'd done. Stephen maintained his denial. Patterson told him he could sit there with that blank expression, but it didn't matter anymore. The detective said Stephen had thought he was smarter than everybody. But someone always leaves something at a crime scene. He'd messed up. Patterson admitted that at first, he hadn't believed Stephen could be involved. People who'd worked with him at the DA's office had vouched for him, said he was a good guy, friendly, helpful. They couldn't believe he'd do something like this. The detective said it was sad, because Stephen probably could have made something of his life. But he'd chosen a different route. The digital evidence was damning. His obsession was undeniable. But the physical evidence that would seal Stephen McDaniel's fate and confirm him as Lauren's killer was still waiting to be found. And it was hiding in plain sight. Police found it in the maintenance room. As investigators expanded their search beyond Stephen's apartment, they checked common areas of the complex. Inside the maintenance room, a small, locked space where tools were kept. They found a hacksaw. It matched the packaging from Stephen's apartment. Same brand, same model. And on the blade, there was dried blood. Testing confirmed it. Lauren Giddings' blood. A bloody sheet was also found, wrapped up and hidden behind equipment. It too tested positive for Lauren's blood. Only 2 people had keys to that room. The maintenance worker who'd been ruled out with an alibi, and Stephen McDaniel, who had master key access to every locked space in the building. Stephen was the only person who could have put that hacksaw there. Security footage from a local hardware store sealed it. CCTV showed Stephen buying the hacksaw on June 27, 2011, the day after Lauren was murdered. Clear image, cash payment, timeline matched. This was Lauren's killer. On August 2, 2011, Stephen McDaniel was formally charged with Lauren's murder, along with 7 counts of child sexual exploitation. His lawyers requested bail at $100,000. The judge set it at $990,000, nearly $1 million. As forensic analysis continued, the charges increased. The grand jury ultimately indicted him on 1 count of murder and 30 counts of child exploitation. The official indictment was chilling. Evidence led the grand jury to believe Stephen McDaniel had killed Lauren Giddings by inflicting bodily harm in a manner unknown at that time, including decapitation. It was the first public mention of how extensive the dismemberment had been. District Attorney Greg Winters acknowledged the case was largely circumstantial. No DNA tied Stephen directly to Lauren's body. No DNA in her bathroom. He'd cleaned thoroughly. No DNA on the hacksaw. He'd worn gloves, but they were confident. Circumstantial didn't mean weak. The murder weapon, his opportunity, his motive, his behavior It all pointed one direction. They were ready for trial. The case seemed airtight. Stephen McDaniel was charged with Lauren's murder, but there was one piece of evidence still to be discovered. One video that would haunt everyone who saw it. One recording that would prove Lauren's worst fears had been horrifyingly real all along. That piece of evidence would emerge during trial preparation. Stephen McDaniel had pleaded not guilty. His defense team, attorneys Frank Hogue and Floyd Buford, planned to argue police had framed him, that evidence was planted, that the case was circumstantial with no DNA proof.
McDaniel, claims his attorneys did not listen to his recommendations and he was forced to plead guilty. Buford told McDaniel he thought he was innocent until investigators found video of McDaniel peeping through Giddings' apartment. Buford says that's when McDaniel made a very detailed confession to how he killed and dismembered Giddings' body. He described all of this as Giddings' family and friends were sitting in the courtroom. Also in the courtroom today were McDaniel's parents. His dad, Mark McDaniel, and his mother were there as well. As we were coming out, I got a chance to speak to Giddings' aunt and uncle who live in Georgia. They say they're just at a loss of words. So for now, reporting live in Augusta, Edna Ruiz, 41 NBC News.
There was an unusual complication. Frank Hogue had actually been one of Lauren's teachers at Mercer. He'd admired her and remembered clearly that she'd been opposed to the death penalty. She'd expressed this in class discussions. Now he was defending the man accused of killing her. District Attorney Greg Winters announced the prosecution would seek the death penalty. Hogue, knowing Lauren's opposition, pushed to have it thrown out. The family would have to weigh Lauren's beliefs against their desire for justice. As both sides prepared for trial, investigators continued forensic analysis of every device from Stephen's apartment, and they found something that changed everything. On a memory card, one that had been there all along but required time for full analysis, investigators discovered a video. It proved Stephen had been stalking Lauren, not just breaking in, not just stealing her things. He'd been filming her. Everything Lauren had feared was real. Her instincts had been perfect. The video showed Stephen had taken a wooden pole and duct-taped a camera to the end. He'd held it up to film through her blinds, watching into her private spaces, her bedroom, her living areas. The most damning detail. The video was filmed on June 26, 2011, the night Lauren was murdered, hours before he killed her. Premeditation was now undeniable. Prosecutor David Cook told the press, "The second I saw this, I said, that's the guy." It removed any remaining doubt. One of Stephen's attorneys later said the case took a turn for the worse when the computer evidence started coming out. The stalking video was the final straw. The defense team advised there was no way to win at trial. A few days after Lauren's death, hundreds had filled St. Mary of the Mills Church for her funeral. But despite extensive searches, only her torso had been recovered. Her head, arms, and legs were never found. That was all her family could bury. The closure was incomplete, devastating. Now, nearly 3 years later, as trial approached, the prosecution offered a deal. They'd drop all 30 counts of child sexual exploitation in exchange for a guilty plea to murder. Stephen would avoid the death penalty but receive life in prison. With his lawyer's advice, Stephen accepted. In April 2014, just a week before trial, Stephen McDaniel finally pleaded guilty to killing and dismembering Lauren Giddings. It was his first admission of guilt after nearly 3 years of denial. For nearly 3 years, 2 huge unanswered questions had hung over the death of Lauren Giddings. What exactly happened the night she died? And what happened to the rest of her body? As part of his plea deal, Stephen McDaniel would finally have to answer both questions, and his confession would be more horrific than anyone could have imagined.
Stephen McDaniel is a psychopath who cowardly allowed darkness and evil to consume him. He should never be permitted to prowl the streets of this world again.
I returned to Lauren's apartment around midnight Sunday to begin to dismember her with the hacksaw that was later recovered from the laundry room maintenance closet. I removed her limbs and head, wrapped them in several black trash bags separately, and discarded them in the Mercer Law School dumpster across the street from Barristers Hall Apartments.
In April 2014, Stephen McDaniel stood before the court to provide those answers. As part of his plea deal, he'd agreed to write an allocution, a formal statement detailing what he'd done and how. It would be read in open court, spelling out in chilling detail what happened the night Lauren died. Lauren's mother, Karen, addressed the media beforehand. She called Stephen a psychopath who had cowardly allowed darkness and evil to consume him. He should never be permitted to prowl the streets again. The prosecution showed the stalking video in court. Lauren's family had to watch him violate her privacy, had to see the premeditation. Prosecutors also referenced alleged forum posts attributed to Stephen that appeared on 4chan after his arrest, disturbing posts describing drugging and killing a neighbor. The post's legitimacy came into serious dispute. Many believed it was someone trolling online, capitalizing on case details. Although prosecutors believed they were genuine, they remain highly questionable. Then came Stephen's confession. According to his allocution, on June 26, 2011, at approximately 4:30 in the morning, Stephen unlocked Lauren's door using his master key. He wore all black with gloves and a mask. He entered while she slept and stood watching her in bed. She woke abruptly, sensing something was wrong. Before she could process what was happening, he leapt onto her and put his hands around her throat. They struggled and fell to the floor. Lauren grabbed his mask and pulled it off. When she realized it was Stephen, her neighbor, she screamed at him. "Stephen, stop!" She cried and fought him for almost 15 minutes as he strangled her. She fought for her life for 15 minutes before she stopped breathing. The cause of death was asphyxiation. He dragged her body into the bathroom and left her in the bathtub overnight and through the following day. On the evening of June 27th, he returned with tools, including the hacksaw he'd purchased that morning. In his statement to the court, Stephen described in explicit detail how he dismembered Lauren's body in that bathtub. He explained how he used the hacksaw to cut through bone and tissue, how he separated her limbs from her torso, how he decapitated her. The court transcript contains these graphic details so disturbing that even seasoned prosecutors struggled to hear them read aloud. He placed body parts in different bags. Her arms, legs, and head went into trash bins around the university campus, dispersed in various locations. They were never recovered despite extensive searches. Her torso he placed in the bin next to the apartment building, thinking it would be collected in the morning. He cut up his mask, gloves, and shirt and flushed them down the toilet. He cleaned the bathroom with bleach, trying to eliminate all evidence, but luminol revealed what he'd missed. The medical examiner confirmed there were no signs of sexual assault. Stephen claimed he never removed Lauren's pink running shorts. They were found on her torso. The details showed he'd seen what she wore to bed from his stalking. Pink shorts. The girl in pink, even in death. Lauren had been nothing but kind to him. She'd tried to include him, introduced him to her mother, attempted friendship. Stephen acknowledged this. It made his betrayal worse. Stephen attempted to explain himself with vague claims about being in a dreamlike, delusional state. He said something in his psychology or pathology must explain it. He was shifting blame, not taking full responsibility. He told Lauren's family he was sorry, that he grieved for her every day. Empty words after such brutality. The prosecution had initially sought the death penalty but ultimately didn't pursue it, because Lauren herself had been strongly against capital punishment. Her family respected her beliefs, even in seeking justice. They hoped Stephen lived a long life in the worst possible way in prison. Stephen McDaniel was sentenced to life in prison with no chance of parole until 2041. He'd be 55 if ever eligible. He'd likely die in prison. But even with his detailed confession, many people, including lead investigators, believed Stephen wasn't telling the whole truth, that there were darker details, perhaps more victims, he would never reveal. And his behavior in the years to come would only deepen those suspicions. Those suspicions would prove well-founded. From prison, Stephen wrote letters claiming he'd been a victim of police intimidation. Despite his detailed confession, he demanded a new trial. In 2014, Stephen filed an appeal, representing himself. He called his former attorney Floyd Buford to testify, seeking damages for ineffective counsel. Buford reminded him that he'd faced the death penalty and ended up with a possibility of parole one day. That was effective representation. Stephen demanded $300,000 in damages. The appeal was denied. In 2022, now 37, Stephen filed another appeal claiming his rights were violated and requesting release. The judge couldn't even consider it. Stephen had filed over a year late. The appeal was denied. Stephen has already filed another appeal. He continues to fight his conviction. Some of Stephen's family still believe he's innocent. His father Mark started a GoFundMe for legal fees. It raised nothing. Lauren's sister Caitlin called it pathetic and delusional. Stephen's mother Glenda has said she has visions of him becoming a Supreme Court justice one day, completely detached from reality. As far as police and Lauren's family are concerned, the case is closed. Detective Chris Patterson believes Stephen is hiding more, possibly more crimes, possibly more victims. Lauren's sister Sarah said they don't believe anything Stephen has said. The confession may not be the complete truth. Police are still searching for Lauren's remains. Her head, arms, and legs were never recovered. They believe they might be in a 62-acre area owned by one of Stephen's family members. Stephen is eligible for parole in 2041 at age 55. Legal experts believe he'll spend the rest of his life behind bars, but Lauren's memory lives on beautifully. Her family celebrates every milestone as if she's there. Annual memorial runs honor her. Sister Caitlin named her daughter Lauren Magnolia. Macon has 2 memorial plaques, one at Mercer Law School, one on a pink bench in Washington Memorial Park, where she loved to run. The Lauren Teresa Giddings Scholarship helps law students achieve the dreams she had. The law firm where she trained named Wednesdays Pink Wednesdays. Employees wear pink, remembering how she brought light to a serious profession. Pink was her way of saying, "Bring it on," to the world. Caitlin reflected that Lauren had been nice to Stephen, tried to include him. The painful lesson is that there's no safety tip that could have saved her. She did everything right. "You should always be nice to people," Caitlin said. "Just because someone looks different doesn't mean they are dangerous." But in this case, he just was. Police praised Lauren's family for acting so quickly. If the trash truck had arrived that morning, the case might have gone cold. Minutes made the difference. She made herself hard to miss and was unapologetic about it. She would have been an amazing public defender. She would have helped so many people. Caitlin's final words, "It's not like she doesn't exist in our lives. She does. It's just very different. Memory keeps her alive. Love never dies." Lauren Giddings was 27 years old. She had just graduated law school. She was days away from starting her new life. She wanted to help people who couldn't help themselves. She made herself hard to miss. And we won't forget her. Thank you for watching. If you'd like to support the channel and help us continue covering cases like Lauren's, giving victims a voice and keeping their memories alive, please like, comment, share, and subscribe. It means everything.